Welcome, everyone. My name is Rick Truer, and I serve Calvin University as the Director of Alumni and Community Relations, and we're so glad to have you here for another Facebook Live interview. We're going to be talking today with Ryan Colburn, who's a 2006 Calvin alumna, and he currently works as a veterinarian at the John Ball Zoo here in Grand Rapids. But before we get to our conversation with Ryan, I have a couple of quick announcements for you. First, next Monday, November 23, we're going to be hosting a virtual nightcap lecture with Professor Derek Skirman. The Alumni Association will be talking to him about the future of artificial intelligence, covering everything from how pre-existing ideas inform our approach to AI to exploring how Christian beliefs can inform norms and principles for moving forward responsibly. It's a free event, but we do need you to register, so we'll put a link to that in the comments here on the page. There'll also be a time for questions and answers. So we look forward to seeing you virtually next Monday. And since we've gone virtual, we are planning on bringing you a lot more virtual events. It is also part of our strategic plan that we had written even before COVID, was to allow more activities to happen online so that alumni all over the globe can participate in things like our nightcap lectures. Also, just a reminder that registration for the January series will also be live on December 1. This year, the January series will be entirely virtual, which means you can watch from wherever you are, in your living room, in your office. Just be sure to check out our amazing lineup of speakers and look for more information on how to register for the lectures. You can also like our January series Facebook page to get notifications for things that are happening with the January series. This again is totally free, but you do need to register in advance, and we'll put that website link in the comments for you too. But now let's get to today's guest. Ryan, we're so glad that you could join us here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. We're also going to be able to let people read more about you and your story in the upcoming issue of Spark, which is our alumni magazine. So that'll be in mailboxes coming soon, or your inbox, so take a look for that. But Ryan, to start, being a vet at the zoo sounds like a big job. Can you tell everyone a little bit about your work and what does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that drew me to veterinary medicine, and certainly to the role here at the zoo, is that probably defining a typical day is one of the hardest things, because no day is the same. We have a lot going on, and here at the zoo we have the added variety of caring for many different species. So our structure of kind of how we run our veterinary program actually kind of goes week over week. I'll usually use my time on Mondays as I start each week. I'm doing rounds through the whole zoo. I'll be traveling from building to building, visiting with keepers, checking in on any patients that we've been monitoring for any illness or treating with medications, just checking in on everything that's been going on. The rest of the week, though, is where we kind of split things up, and a variety of things happen. So we have a big emphasis here on having a strong preventive medicine program, so making sure that every animal in the zoo gets a routine physical exam or checkup with appropriate vaccinations and diagnostic tests throughout their lives. And we try to do that usually either every year or every other year, depending on how old they are, what species they are. Each has a little bit of a different twist to it. So they all have individualized plans, and we use the time through the rest of the week to start getting those things done. My role here is also one to be available 24/7. So since I started here in 2012, I've been on call 24/7, except for when I have someone covering if I'm on out of town or something like that. And that's so that if, no matter what time something happens here, if an animal is sick, not doing well, the keepers can call me and I can be available to address that and address it quickly. We also will provide quarantine services for the zoo, which right now quarantine, of course, is a huge buzzword, and it's something that conjures up a lot of stress for all of us with COVID. But in the zoo setting, quarantine is also used for when we have new arrivals. So animals move around between zoos a lot more often than many people realize, either as part of breeding programs or being shifted from space to space. And so when they do that, it's our role to be in communication between zoos, share information on that animal's medical history, and then have them settle in, usually here with us at the animal hospital, for at least 30 to 90 days, depending on what type of animal it is. And we're using that time to make sure that they're healthy and that everything is lining up exactly as we'd like before they enter the zoo and join the other animals here. So a lot of those things are what keeps me busy throughout the week. The other thing I always tell students who are interested in this profession is zoo veterinarians have kind of a unique mix of clinical medicine and administrative roles. So I'm involved in approving everything from the diets the animals eat to the enrichment activities that they're provided, guiding exhibit design, protocols and policies through the zoo, which for this year has been very interesting because we've all had to adjust to this new reality with COVID. So there's really never a dull moment, and it would be beyond to say that there's no 2 days that are alike.
Yeah, I bet. Well, you mentioned there's a variety of things happening. No 2 days are alike. So what's your craziest story from the zoo, or the most unique animal that you've had to work with?
Absolutely. I think I was trying to think of what are those crazy stories, and it kind of depends on what you define as crazy, because there's a whole assortment of things. I would say one of the things that's really unique is we do get to work with really interesting species, and for us, we have the added ability of working with a very intelligent species, which is the chimpanzee. So we have a group of 6 chimps here that I work with really regularly, and sometimes they are too smart for their own good. And they look to kind of trick you a little bit. So one of probably crazy story that the keepers like to tell is the time that I knelt down to say hello to one of our male chimps, who usually does very well with me, but he was secretly sitting there with a mouthful of water, just waiting for me to get close and just to spray it on my face. So the chimp and veterinary relationship sometimes gets strained. I'm really lucky to have a really good working relationship with all 6 of ours, but he felt the need to kind of put me in my place that day. But on the flip side, there's so many different twists and turns medically in terms of how we have to adapt. I mean, we work with meerkats, who are a species that in order to do a physical exam on one, I need to isolate all of our group and make sure that we never pull one away and put it back, because they have such intense social dynamics that that reintroduction, even after an hour, can be challenging. So there's all these kind of interesting twists and turns that make it a pretty unique process for us.
Yeah, I imagine you have to know a lot about a lot of different animals. So and you're probably constantly learning at the job too. So
well, and that's one of the things that I love about it, because you are always learning. I'm always diving into a textbook, researching, reaching out to colleagues, because we have so many species that we're working with that we need to be able to share and network and use all of the information at our fingertips so that we can provide the best care for them.
Yeah, and I heard recently there was a baby lynx that broke its leg. Is that true?
Yeah, and actually, COVID has been a tough year in 2020, but for us, we actually had a lot of babies born at the zoo. We had our first lynx kitten born this year. We had 3 red panda cubs. We had 2 6-banded armadillos. So it's been a very exciting year, honestly, here at the zoo to have new babies around. But yes, Yoshi, our new Canadian lynx, managed to kind of follow her mother on a track that she herself wasn't ready for. So climbing to a spot where she slipped and fell, literally just like a kid who's trying to take on the world a little too fast, and had a minor fracture. And one of the things that's so different for us is it's very easy with a dog or cat to say, all right, we're going to put on a cast, we're going to put on a bandage. You're going to need to give your dog extra help getting around, and you're going to have him rest in a cage so that he's not overdoing it. We have very little control over what our patients do when they are, wild animals. And so for Yoshi, the decision was, as a young animal, do we pull her away from her mother at that point, because she was old enough to be away from her, or do we give her a try and let her have that bandage and have that splint in place and monitor really close to make sure, A, that she doesn't take it off, but also that her mom doesn't take it off. And thankfully, both of them left it alone. We did have to change it periodically during the process while it was healing to make sure that it was staying clean. But it worked well. She's off to the races and it has not looked back. So she really responded well.
That's great. Yoshi's a great name. So how do you decide what you're going to name the animals?
There have been a variety of ways, actually. I mean, historically, I think internally within the zoo, there was always kind of the unspoken rule that whoever finds the baby, whoever's the first keeper on the scene, if you will, gets to have input on the name. And for some, that's still the case. But we also had fun this year in finding some creative new ways to bring in some names. So the Red Pandas were part of a social media naming contest where we had some voting available. Recently, our Cotton Top Tamarins, which we had some babies in that group as well, the keepers put their names on a variety of containers with treats, and the monkeys got to pick their own name. So whichever container they went to, that was the name they're going to have. So there's a variety of ways, and it kind of depends on who they are and what the situation is.
Oh, that's great. I know conservation is a passion for you. How do you define conservation, and how does it play into your current role at the zoo?
I mean, for me, I think when I think of conservation, I think of it hand in hand with a term that I used a lot, and the faculty used a lot during my time at Calvin, and that's stewardship. I think we have a responsibility to care for the other residents of this planet and the planet itself. And so when you look at conservation kind of from the zoo profession standpoint, our goal, we always say, is to preserve wild animals and wild places. For animals to exist in the wild, we need to make sure that the obstacles to them doing that, whether that be the destruction of that habitat, spread of human populations, and sometimes it's just the interactions. Some of the greatest conservation work being done right now, the focus of what's actually happening is happening on the human side. An example being, if you're looking at predators in Africa like lions, one of their challenges would be how they are seen as a threat to livestock and livelihood. But if you give communities the tools to protect their livestock, then you've protected their livelihood, made their lives better, but also protected lions. Similar things are going on in Nepal with red pandas. It's not just one species in a vacuum. Many times, if we're making efforts to save an orangutan, that habitat's supporting hundreds of other species. But even greater than that, we use the term One Health sometimes. Planet, animals, humans, we're all part of that. And so we need to take care of that whole system. And all of that kind of goes hand in hand with conservation work.
So if you think about some other zoos that are doing conservation work, are there certain ones that you'd suggest that people visit if they're interested in seeing this, like, or zoos that you think are doing it well that people could see when they're traveling, or even in their hometowns for some of the people who are watching? What should people look for?
Yeah, I think one of the things is to look for zoos that have conservation as a focus in their mission. And one of the first passes at that is to really look for zoos that are accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. There are hundreds and hundreds of organizations throughout the country that are what we'd say USDA licensed facilities that exhibit animals, but only a small percentage of those are AZA accredited zoos. That accreditation means a lot. Not only does it mean that it's a zoo that is expected to have and is expected to prove that it is performing conservation work at its core, because we have that built into the processes within the zoo, but also rising up to the gold level standard of care for animals, providing top-notch care and welfare for the animals that they do have in the zoo facility. So I use that as kind of a first pass. There are many wonderful zoos throughout the country. A lot of times people will zoom in on some of the big names, the big zoos like San Diego, who does fantastic work in conservation. But you don't have to be a big zoo to do great conservation work. So there are several smaller AZA facilities that are doing excellent work as well.
That's great. So you mentioned that part of your job includes design of exhibits. And I'm wondering if can the design of zoo exhibits help contribute to conservation and to educating zoo visitors?
Yeah, I think for me, when I get to be part of the exhibit design process, that's one of the things that when you go to vet school, you're not necessarily thinking, oh, I want to design an exhibit someday. But when you get into zoo medicine, it's actually one of the most exciting parts of what we do, because there's so much that goes into that. We want an exhibit, first of all, the first pass is that it's going to be an appropriate home for that animal. One of the roles I play in that is looking at not only the structure and design, but also the materials that are used to make sure that it's safe for that animal. We also look at ways to make sure that that animal is going to have good welfare and be able to be cared for in that space. And that also involves being able to, is it an animal we can train to be part of their own healthcare, that we can have them come and I can do an ultrasound or a blood sample or a variety of other procedures with them awake in a safe way. So we look at that angle too. We here at the zoo have actually put a recent emphasis on the other side of it, which is just how does the facility impact, like you were talking about, conservation, or I'd say sustainability as well. And so there are things like, if everyone's heard of like LEED standards and things like that, there are now additional standards above that, one in which is called Living Building Challenge. And all of that goes into evaluating how much energy that building is utilizing. Can we use solar energy or other sources to make it a self-sustaining building that's not going to pull additional energy requirements? How is it using water? Are we using that effectively? This year, the zoo made some huge progress on our stormwater design, which is not anything anyone thinks is very cool when you're like, hey, do you want to donate to our project? We're working on stormwater, but it's huge because water is key to every habitat, and how we use that water can set an example for trying to do that in a sustainable way. And then I think lastly, it's the educational piece, because our goal in having people come here to the zoo is to not only have a good time, enjoy the time with their family and see some amazing animals, but we want them to be inspired to act, to realize that these animals do need our help and action to preserve the planet for them. And so the goal of the exhibit is also to present that animal in a way that would be very natural, a space that is, as much as we can, will bring in the elements that they would normally encounter in the wild, so that they have that whole picture of what we're kind of trying to portray for their life outside of the zoo as well.
That's great. So you talked about the educational experience. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your educational experience at Colburn and what it was like for you, and how did it help prepare you for your role today?
Sure. I loved my time at Colburn. I was very happy during my time there, and it did prepare me really well to get to where I am now. I think a few different parts of my time at Colburn kind of weighed in on that. First, I would say was that emphasis on stewardship through my time in the biology department, learning about not only the intricacies that are these biological processes, this physiology, all the things that I needed to know technically to get into veterinary school. It was looking at that through the lens of stewardship that really kind of set me up for that. Certainly academically, I wanted to be in a place that prepared me for what was going to be a very rigorous educational endeavor. Veterinary school is very competitive. At the time, I believe the year that I applied, I went to Michigan State after Colburn, and that the entry class every year is usually right around 100 to 110 people. There were over 1,200 applicants for those spots, and so having Calvin's name behind me and having that education set me up to be a good applicant. But the rigors of study at Colburn also prepared me to be a good student. And to be organized, to be on top of my studies, and to be able to follow that. I think the other thing that Colburn did for me that I look back on that I really remember fondly is that I was not in a big institution where I was limited to the other things that I could explore. I was a member of the Colburn band for all 4 years that I was there, and being able to continue to be actively involved in the arts while also being part of the biology department was really special for me as well.
Yeah, that's great. So Calvin's mission is to equip students to think deeply, to act justly, and to live wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal in the world. I'm just wondering, how do you feel you're living out that mission in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, for me, I think when I look at the baseline of what being a veterinarian is, we take an oath. We take an oath to care for our patients. And my role here at the zoo, my chief responsibility is to the animals that are here on site that are my patients. I think that being there as a caretaker, a steward for them, is that first pass. But I think beyond that is what that sets us up to be able to do. Having animals that are well cared for, that are healthy, that are here to be ambassadors of their species and get everyone else inspired and excited. That's where you start to see that ripple effect of what we're doing here going out far larger than that, and being able to impact what happens overall from a conservation standpoint. I think that that's for me where I see my mission kind of playing out.
Yeah, that's great. So we did get a question from someone who's watching, wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is the future of zoos? Are there ways that you're innovating for the future?
Sure. I could probably talk on that for a long time. Zoos have transformed a lot. And I think when you talk to people, I've even recently had a presentation that I was giving to a group of people where I was asked kind of, how do you justify zoos? There's a whole array of people's perspectives on having animals living in captivity. We like to say that they're living in human care, because there is that connotation of negativity, having them in a zoo versus why not just have them in the wild. And I think the progression and the evolution of zoos has gone from a very strictly entertainment approach of kind of what we call the menagerie style. You walk from cage to cage to building and seeing animals housed in that way. It kind of shifted further to focus more strongly on education in the I'd say the 90s, early 2000s. And increasingly now, the two things that I think are at the heart of zoos right now and into the future is going to be conservation and animal welfare. Conservation being what we've just been talking about for this last bit is what the end product is. The goal is that inspiration and that action. And I believe strongly that the animals that are in that zoo, any zoo, serve as that ambassador to inspire their human counterparts to act on their behalf. But I think the animal welfare piece is also what's evolving really fast. And that's a good thing, because it means that what's happening now is that zoos are designing their spaces, they're designing their programs in a way that takes that stewardship piece to the next level and focuses on how animals live their life while they're there in the zoo. For most individual animals that live in zoos now, we're not seeing animals that are being taken from the wild to live in zoos. In fact, we're actually serving as home to animals that are all part of breeding programs within the zoo system. So we're not bringing in animals from the outside in most cases. We're actually having a population that is pretty far removed from the wild. I can say that our lions, for instance, if we were to drop them in Africa, would not fare well because they are used to a certain level of luxury that they wouldn't get in the wild. So we want to make sure that we remember that piece. These individual animals are not ones that would go out and live a natural life in the wild. So while they're here, the focus is, what do we do to make them very comfortable? What do we do to have them have naturalistic environments where they're able to exercise their normal behaviors? So what enrichment can we use? What new innovative designs for how we provide food? Can we make sure that they're getting nutrition, not in a way that, hey, twice a day the food shows up, but we want them to work for it. In the wild, they would work for it, and that's what stimulates their mind. So we want to be able to do that as well. So I think the focus now that you see in modern zoos that are heading into that future is a focus on those two things. And it's an exciting time to be part of zoos. I think it's also important for zoos to share that, because sometimes for those that are uncomfortable or not quite so sure they like the idea of animals living in a zoo, it makes a big difference if you know that behind the scenes they have 24/7 access to the top-notch veterinary care. They have highly trained zookeepers, many of which have at least bachelor's, if not master's degrees in their field. So that there's a lot of effort that goes in behind the scenes to make sure that animals really live their the best life that they can while they're serving as that ambassador role.
Even zoos are reforming and renewing, so it's
Yep.
good to hear. Thanks again for being here, Ryan. It's been great talking with you. And just a reminder to all of our alumni, you can register for our nightcap event lecture that's going to be happening this coming Monday. So keep an eye out for the January series registration that's going live on December 1st. And then check out the next issue of Spark for more insights on Ryan and his work at the zoo. Have a good afternoon, and we'll be back in a couple weeks.